I've lived in Chapel Hill and in Ryan for the last 10 years. I work at Queensland University of Technology. I grew up in the United Kingdom, one of those POMs who hasn't quite shaken the accent despite having not lived in the country since the late 1970s. Most of my higher education has actually been in the United States, University of Wisconsin. I did my PhD. I worked at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor for 10 years before coming to the States, coming to Australia. But I've been coming to Australia actually since the early 1980s, and my wife and I had the opportunity to spend some time on an Aboriginal settlement in the Northern Territory, Yuendamu, which has been in the news quite a bit recently with the recent intervention. So we have a long history with Australia. Love the country and came here as soon as we had the opportunity to migrate. I work in the Faculty of Health at Queensland University of Technology, and my specific area is in human movement control. I study issues such as movement disorders, some neurological movement disorders in the past, particularly Parkinson's disease, injury prevention, and aspects of ergonomics, which really relates to such things as accident causation and the prevention of accidents. I've been, like a number of politicians, or budding politicians, sat on the sidelines for a number of years and observing the process with very keen interest, but really becoming increasingly frustrated that the major parties in particular are serving people less and less well. And in saying that, this is not really intended to mean that I don't believe in the importance of the major parties. I think it's absolutely crucial that we have strong parties and a strong party system for a stable government. But increasingly, the focus of the major parties seems to be on each other rather than on issues. And I think that an independent has the capacity to offer another voice. And I think there have been some very significant independent voices in our parliament, and I'd like to see some more. I would rate 1, 2, and 3, but not necessarily in that order, health, education, and environment, both for their own sake, because each one of those, there are pressing issues in each of those 3 areas, but also because they are intimately related to our economic well-being and our economic future. And the coalition, I believe, would take the argument that you cannot support properly education and health and engage in significant initiatives to protect the environment unless you have a strong economy. I think that's true. The converse is also true, that unless you have a nation in which we look after the environment and in which we educate our young people to the best of our ability, and unless we ensure that people have reasonable levels of health, you're not going to have a very sound economy. So those are the most important ones from my perspective. Certainly. Well, I mean, this is a pressing issue out in the western suburbs. Those of us who have to go into the city to work every day will know that if you travel on Moggill Road, for example, the Western Freeway, don't go at the wrong time because you're going to be virtually on a parking lot. And one initiative that I think is absolutely crucial is to get our house in order with respect to public transport. The key way I think we might explore this is to look at the possibility of at least a section of elevated busway along the course of the Western Freeway. And the reason for this is that there's been a study recently that has shown that people will indeed take the bus to work, provided it takes at least 20 minutes off their commute. And I think we could do that if we added some new capacity, and we could use the existing transport corridor without spoiling more natural land. So that's an idea. I'd like to see it explored. I'm sure there are engineering challenges and other sorts of issues, but we should at least get some new ideas on the table. Oh, I look very sympathetic towards it. I think it's a great idea, and I think it would serve the city centre area better. The one challenge that I do see is if you take the Ryan and other parts of the western suburbs, they're very dispersed. It's not at all a dense population, and the line that the Greens have suggested out to the west would stop at Kenmore and run along Moggill Road. Now, the fact of the matter is that the vast majority of people who commute into the city would not be within walking distance of that railway line. That means that they would either have to take a bus or a car to get even to the light rail connection, and people tend not to do that. So I'm afraid that while it's a great idea for many areas, I just don't think it's going to serve us that well out in the western suburbs. I suppose the issue here is that we need to know where the demand really would be. There's the Great Circle Line that goes around Brisbane. It's a pretty slow and inefficient operation. So there could well be demand for that. I think I would need to take advice as to where the demand really is before I could take a position. However, I do think that a related issue that's absolutely crucial is to try to cut out, and I believe we can, a lot of travel that is quite simply unnecessary. And the key to this is to ensure that we have better integration of employment and people's places of residence. I'd like to see far more encouragement for initiatives like telecommuting, local facilities, for example, where people could go and spend a couple of days a week, at least, even if they do work in the city centre the rest of the time, working from a properly equipped office in their local area. Often it's the case that the home is not the best place from many different points of view to undertake office work, and yet a lot of travel I think we could simply take out of the system altogether. Well, for some people the home is absolutely fine and they have the technology that they require, their computing needs are relatively straightforward and so forth. But I think for others actually that a locally equipped telecommuting centre of some type is the appropriate way to go. And funny enough, I came across one in Kenmore the other day, not expecting to find it. I was just walking down the little commercial strip in the centre of Kenmore and found that there's a new business there that's offering precisely that sort of service amongst others. So I think we're going to see that grow, but what I'd like to see is government encouragement to grow that faster and more effectively. Well, that's an enormous challenge, and to be quite honest, I don't know if I have a good solution to that. I think people have talked at various times about, for example, providing incentives for new migrants to Australia to settle in regional areas. I'm not convinced that's very successful. Quite often it's the case that people who are coming from other countries tend to aggregate in the city centres in part because there's already an established community of people from their own country, and that's an important element of integrating properly into a new land. As far as people who are already Australian citizens and have been here for a long time, trying to encourage them to look at living elsewhere, I don't have any particular ideas there. One of the roles of an independent is to support the best thinking that's there, and I have no monopoly on wisdom, that I do know. If I were in the Parliament and people were to come up with ideas that would encourage sensible development of our regions and repopulation of areas perhaps which are economically in trouble, I would look very closely at the best ideas and support those that I felt were the most effective and the most beneficial. Well, to be perfectly frank, I think that it's a pretty colossal waste of time. And I say that without any disrespect for the intentions of this particular exercise. There have been a number of similar ones in other countries, particularly the UK and New Zealand. But I'm just not persuaded that it's going to be effective. In the end, if we want to improve the quality of research, then what we need to do is to provide appropriate support for the people who actually do it. And in many respects, this is going to be a game whereby universities will seek to position themselves and to put their best foot forward in terms of activity that's already going on. And it does take a significant amount of time and resources to go through these exercises. So I have to say, although it's well intended, I believe that it has a significant potential to not be a successful activity. I've had the great privilege of chairing a school council in one of our local high schools for 3 years, and I feel very, very strongly that we should allow greater autonomy in the running of our schools. And I know this is a state issue, not a federal issue, but the federal government can exert some influence here. I think that a school that is responsible to its local community is a very, very important goal. One way to I think, encourage this is to provide the community, through its properly elected school council, the capacity to hire and fire a principal. The principal sets the tone for any school. If the principal is doing an effective job and they're supported by their school council and their school community, then they can be even more effective. But if they're not performing well, then they should be answerable directly to the community that they serve, I believe, rather than a large state bureaucracy. So that's one issue. With respect to other facets of education at the state level, again, I realize that this is not a federal issue directly. I think the concept of amalgamating schools into larger groups is exactly the wrong way to go. I'm very, very skeptical as to whether that's going to make life in any way better for our students or our families. We have only to look now at the transport problems, just simply getting to school. Out at Kenmore State High School, for example, there are children coming in from Mount Crosby and out in the western parts of Ryan who can on certain days take over an hour to get to school. Regularly, 150, 200 children late for school because of traffic congestion and delays. Now, how on earth is it going to be better if we further concentrate schooling in a small number of very large schools? I just don't see it.